All right, let's jump right into a really big topic: the role of citizens in public decision-making.
Hey everyone, welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5340, Introduction to Public Policy and Management. We're digging into the readings from Section '06, the role of citizens in decision-making. It's a fantastic topic, so let's get into it.
So let me just start with a question for you. Have you ever been invited to a community meeting or filled out a survey about some new policy, and you just got that sinking feeling that the decision was, well, already made? Yeah, that exact feeling is right at the heart of everything we're going to talk about today.
To really understand that frustration, we kind of have to start with the ideal. I mean, why do we even talk about involving citizens in the first place? What's the goal we're supposed to be shooting for?
Well, in their article, Constructive Conflict, Participation and Shared Governance, Maria Veronica Elias and Mohammed G. Alkadry make a great point. They say that really good governance needs two different kinds of knowledge. On one hand, you've got the administrators with their technical knowledge, all the data, the budgets, the legal stuff. But on the other hand, you have citizens, and they have what's called experiential knowledge. You know, the on-the-ground, real-life wisdom that comes from actually living in a place. The ideal isn't about one side bossing the other around. It's about blending those two types of knowledge to make way smarter decisions.
So that's the dream. But what's the reality? To really dig into that, we have to talk about a super important article from 1969 by Sherry Arnstein called A Ladder of Citizen Participation. It gives us this incredible framework for looking at what's really going on when officials say they want your input. And this quote from Arnstein just nails it. There is a critical difference between going through the empty ritual of participation and having the real power needed to affect the outcome of the process. This really frames the whole problem, doesn't it? Is this just a show, an empty ritual, or is there real power for citizens? Okay, so Arnstein's ladder has 8 rungs, and we're going to start at the absolute bottom in the category she calls non-participation. The 2 lowest rungs are manipulation and therapy. And here, the whole point isn't to empower people at all. It's actually to educate them or cure them, basically to get them to agree with what the people in power already want. It's participation as a total sham.
Now, if we climb up a little bit, we get to the middle of the ladder. Arnstein calls this section degrees of tokenism. This is where things might start to feel pretty familiar. This is where we see things like informing, consultation, and placation. You get told what the plan is. Maybe you even get to speak for 2 minutes at a public hearing. But the key thing Arnstein points out is that having a voice is not the same thing as having influence. And that brings us to the core idea of tokenism. It's when you allow citizens to hear and be heard, but you give them zero power to make sure that their views are actually taken seriously. You can talk all you want, but there's no guarantee that anyone has to listen or change a single thing. It's the illusion of power.
Okay, finally, we get to the top of the ladder, degrees of citizen power. This is where the real stuff happens. On the partnership rung, citizens can actually negotiate with officials. At delegated power, citizens actually have the majority of seats on committees. And at the very top, citizen control, citizens are the ones running the whole show. This is where participation really becomes democracy.
Arnstein's ladder is an amazing way to diagnose the problem, but it also kind of leaves us hanging, right? It makes you ask, okay, so how do we actually do better? How do we design a process that actually climbs that ladder? Let's look at some other ideas that try to answer that. For a really cool concrete example, we can check out the work of Mark Robbins, Bill Simonsen, and Barry Feldman. In their article, Citizens and Resource Allocation, they describe this super interesting experiment they did in West Hartford, Connecticut to get past the usual surface-level opinion polls. What they did was so smart. Instead of just asking people what they wanted, they made them make real trade-offs. You can see here, if you wanted to increase funding for something like street repairs, you had to choose something else to cut, like parks and recreation. This gets you much more honest data because it makes people face the same difficult choices that public managers have to make every single day.
So beyond just one-off tools, we've got bigger ways to think about this. The scholar Fung came up with something called the democracy cube. Instead of a simple up and down ladder, it's a model with 3 dimensions. It forces you to ask, first, who gets to participate? Is it an open-door policy or just a select few? Second, how do they talk and decide things? Is it just them listening to experts, or are they really debating together? And finally, what happens with their input? Does it actually have real power and authority?
And building on ideas like that, Work by John Bryson and his colleagues really drives home this point. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here. The key, they say, is that you have to start with a really clear purpose. Then you design a process that fits that specific goal and context, and you have to be ready to change and adapt. Copying and pasting a process from another city just won't work.
So, let's say we do all that. We design this amazing, thoughtful participation process. That brings us to the final and maybe the toughest challenge for a public manager. How do you know if it actually worked? How do you measure if all this effort actually made government better?
And this is way harder than it sounds. Sandra Van Thiel and Franz L.A. talk about something they call the performance paradox, and it is a massive trap. The paradox is this. Sometimes the things we measure, our performance indicators, have a really weak link to actual performance. It's what happens when you start focusing only on what's easy to count instead of what actually counts.
So, how do you escape that paradox? Mary Bryna Sanger's article, From Measurement to Management, gives us this powerful case study, the CityStat program in Baltimore. It was put in place by Mayor Martin O'Malley, and it was this relentless, data-heavy system designed to force real accountability.
And get this, what was the impact? A 40% turnover rate among the top managers in city agencies. Wow. This system wasn't about putting numbers on a spreadsheet and forgetting about them. It was about using that data in high-stakes, regular meetings to demand answers and action. You had to know your numbers and have a plan, or as one official said, they're out. It was a huge culture shift from just measuring things to actually managing them.
Okay, so let's try and tie a bow on all of this. What are the big takeaways from these readings? First, citizens have this incredibly valuable experiential knowledge. Second, participation without power is just tokenism, and we can use tools like Arnstein's ladder to see it for what it is. And finally, real success takes careful design that fits the situation and a hardcore commitment to measuring what truly matters.
Which leaves us with one final question to think about. If you were the one in charge, if you had to design a public process for your community, where on Arnstein's ladder would you even aim? And based on everything we've just talked about, how would you set up a system to prove, without falling into that performance paradox, that it actually made a difference?